Please welcome the directors of the film, Carl Deal and Tia Lessin.
And special guest Michael Moore. Before we take an audience question, I'd love to hear from you, Michael. Any reactions for us?
It was a good movie. It was in color. And it was under 90 minutes. Those are always the best movies. No. I'm curious, guys. Describe the night or the day or the moment when you decided to publicly tell us the story of how you were being corralled, harassed, whatever, by PBS. Because those who are documentary filmmakers in here know that it's very hard to get funding for documentaries, and there are very few sources, and the ITVS, PBS, you basically knew that you would be burning a bridge, probably in the future, to one of the very few sources of documentary funding. There are so many things that other filmmakers know this too, that go on behind the scenes that we all have to put up with, but everybody mostly knows to not say anything because there's like 3 or 4 funding sources and that's it. And the people who didn't fund you saw what you did to WNET and PBS. So I'm just curious. There must have been a back and forth between the two of you, or how you came to the decision to essentially bring your careers to an end.
He's not kidding. I mean, he's a funny guy, but yeah.
I'm not sure how to answer that, except to first say we love all of our funders. And thank you. And we hope that you'll continue to support us. For us, we understand that we're getting our reputation in the documentary funding community for being, what's the phrase?
Loudmouth?
Loudmouths. No, look, I think I can
for
speak
being
for
Toto,
myself.
you pulled the curtain back, and you're not supposed to do that.
Look, there was a certain point in which there was a turn, and it became really apparent to us that not only was this phenomenon happening, which at the end of the day probably doesn't surprise any of us that much that it happens, but the way that we were told and the way that we were led down this path. And it became clear at a certain point that the plug had been pulled months earlier without us being told, and we continued to work, and we continued to spend money that we thought was coming to finish this film, and we felt like certain people had behaved in bad faith with us. And so that was one thing that was happening, and that makes you angry. But then, look, this is a film that's about the way some of the wealthiest Americans use messaging through the media to shape the public debate and to influence policymakers along the way. And that's what was happening right before our very eyes. And last spring, I don't know if anybody in the audience remembers seeing the reports about how Charles and David Koch were making a play for the Tribune companies of newspapers, which is the LA Times, the Tribune in Chicago, the largest Spanish language daily, the perfect setup for editorial control in some major markets. And so, we saw that happening, and we felt like the story that we have to tell can inform this conversation that's happening right now. And there was a movement growing up around that to try and stop that sale. So we felt like it was a really good moment where speaking out publicly could have an impact beyond whatever the consequences might be for us for this film.
Right, because you can speculate all you want about how the Kochs might have influenced the Baltimore Sun and the Chicago Tribune. We had a direct experience with how the Kochs and David Koch's money and his millions directly impacted really actually very good people, the documentary gatekeepers over at the Independent Television Service, and how it really corrupted them with regard to this film. And so we thought we couldn't be silent at that point. We felt that we needed to not just draw attention to the public media's compromised position, but really the power of David Koch's money, the power of all these billionaires' money over all our institutions and all our beloved institutions. We are happy to report that David Koch is no longer a trustee of WNET. He remains on the board of trustees of WGBH, one of the largest producers of public television content. And one of the reasons this is the most objectionable, it has nothing to do with his political positions, really, or even the fact that he deployed hundreds of millions of dollars in the last election. PBS's own rules say that if there's any appearance of impropriety, if there's an appearance that, that there's been any influence, whether or not there's been an influence, whether or not David Koch's money has influenced programming at Nova, the science channel, the fact that he funds and is an underwriter of Nova, that in itself is inappropriate because he's a oil tycoon. Forget about his political positions. He owns pipelines and refineries. So there is a growing movement to remove him from GBH. I hope you guys can join that. If anybody here is part of that movement, you can go to our website, citizenkoch.com, and get involved with that fight.
Michael asked the question earlier about the risks that we took in speaking publicly, and I want to just acknowledge Harry Belafonte is here in the aisle here on my left. And I wanted just to thank you for the example that you've given to all of us who want to create art with purpose and organize and create change. Nobody has done it as effectively and as beautifully as you. So thank you.
One of our heroes, American hero.
You're still a lollipop.
Would you like to join us?
No, I don't. I just want to make a very quick observation. I think, first of all, like so many in the audience, I thank you so very much for having the insistence to be tenacious, to pursue doing this. I think you've done everybody a great service. I would like to recommend, however, that one of the things that your film made glaringly evident to me was that doing as you should have done, focusing on Wisconsin and focusing on the way in which the process took over that state and gave us Scott Walker. If it is not too late, I think somewhere in your film you should have an epilogue that reflects the deeper crisis of the Koch brothers' existence. Because although they did this mischief in Wisconsin, you should see what they have done in Florida. You should see what they have done in North Carolina. You should see what they have done in Iowa and in Idaho. And you should see that this rather insidious moment in our country's history is surrounded by others who are equally as powerful economically as the Koch brothers. And this group, which the film referred to the quiet, clandestine meetings that are taking place in country clubs, but this is as vicious an attempt to undermine the democratic procedure and to take our country from us and to reverse the great gains that have been made by those who paid a big price for the struggle in the civil rights movement. But I just want to thank you so much for your strength, your courage, a beautiful film. And if it's not too late, I'll give you a few bucks to put an epilogue in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.